Welcome to Electric Grumpy World. Of course, I am your host, Electric Sheep City, joined by the grumpiest guy in the game, Guy Grumpy. How you doing, buddy?
I'm grumpy.
And what, dear sir, are you grumpy about this morning?
I'm grumpy that there's only one episode left of Westworld in this season, and we're gonna have to wait some undisclosed amount of time for the next one.
That, my friend, is a very good thing to be grumpy about. Hard agree on that one. So, before we go too far into it, of course, this is Electric Grumpy World, where we are recapping the most recent episode of Westworld. So, of course, spoilers abound. We're going to be talking about, like, literally everything that happened. Not literally. So many things that happen in the most recent episode, Season 3, Episode 7, Past Pawn of Westworld. So if you're down with spoilers, and or, of course, have seen the episode, stay with us. It'll be a blast. It'll be so much fun. If you don't,
there's a lot to talk about too.
So much to talk about. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this episode. I wasn't the first time I watched it. Not gonna lie. The first time I watched it, I was like, And then in my rewatch, I was like, oh my god, there's so much here. And I'm so excited to go into it with my dear friend, Guy Grumpy. So without further,
let's waste no time and jump in.
Let's do it. So, of course, this is Season 3, Episode 7, Past Pawn, which I looked up Past Pawn because I haven't played too much chess. And so it was like, okay, I'm familiar with the idea of the pawns going to the very end and becoming the queen. But the past pawn is kind of where the pawns like pass in order to kind of get to that point. So I'm not sure if this is the big takeaway is Caleb kind of becoming that queen figure or if he's kind of on his path, right? So we're talking about, as I said, spoilers for the whole thing. The title of the episode is low-key a spoiler once you know kind of what happens as well, which is kind of cool. So there are about 6 basic plots in this.
6.
There's probably more than that, honestly, but
right
for our intents, there's the taking of Musashi's pearl, Man in Black back in action, Caleb's history, Maeve and Dolores' fight, and Caleb, the passing pawn. Caleb takes the mantle. So, of course, the very beginning of taking Musashi's pearl is the like opening title sequence. So there's some conflict with Musashi. So of course Musashi is also Dolores, right? He also is referred to a lot in this kind of opening credits as Sato, which I think is kind of his the identity
of us.
that he took on in his takeover of the Yakuza, right? Like that's what they're all kind of calling him there. So just, I'm calling him Musashi here because that was that actor's name in the previous seasons. He's Musashi. So they're sitting around. He's asked something to be delivered to their friend. So he sends something off to be delivered. And this is, of course, I think the hack that Dolores got at the very end of the last episode. That's my theory on that. Regardless, something's being delivered from Musashi to somebody else, and it's very important.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I hadn't connected that, so.
Yeah, that
Great
was
observation.
That was something that kind of later I was like, what even is this? Who's it going to? It could be something else, but I think this is kind of the thread tying to a previous episode, kind of transitionary aspect. So Charlotte calls, says Dolores' plan is for them to die, but that Charlotte has a new plan. She, of course, is also Dolores, and she's leaked Musashi's location to someone who is eager to catch up with him. It's Clementine. Musashi tells her that both she and Maeve have some practice selling themselves, but he thought they'd be more selective about a buyer. So he thinks, of course, that they're just in the pocket of Surak, which I mean, doesn't seem like it's inaccurate, to be honest.
Right?
So Clementine retorts that they're not for sale, but that she's there for Musashi and him alone.
But she's apparently not, because she does take out several others.
Many others. So Musashi, I have there Sato, tells Clem to go back to her master, tell him he's too late. It's too late. He's already sent whatever it is off. So this is the thing that makes me think that it might possibly not be the package that was delivered before. That it might end up being, something that we'll see in a future episode. Next episode.
The next episode?
Yeah, the last one.
That's kind of where I was going, and I was kind of wondering who their friend was, whether it was taking it back to Dolores and referring to himself, or to himself as their friend, or if it was going the other way, where, hey, we're delivering some information to, or delivering something dangerous then to Serac, or to someone else, William, maybe.
Yeah.
Bernard they refer to as their friend quite often.
Ooh, that's a really good point. I think it very well could be Bernard as well. Regardless, it's not really made completely clear. Whatever it is, though, Musashi tells Clem that it's too late. It's already off. So Clementine attacks. She busts open the fancy champagne glass that she was drinking, and she goes hardcore at him. And Musashi retaliates. He has been carrying this case around, and the case turns into this huge gun, with which he of course wings her essentially, but in the torso, so not quite the wing. He gets her though. And kind of during this conflict, Musashi kind of is retreating a little bit, and Hanario emerges and skewers him through the middle. And she's like, "Musashi was a good man. You have desecrated his image." Epic. So epic.
Yeah, it was a pretty good fight scene to kick off an episode. It was definitely movie quality stuff there, and I found it to be a bit disconnected. I was expecting to see some follow up on it in the rest of the episode or something, and so it, unfortunately, we never really come back to that, at least not that I recognized. So hearing you say that it could tie back to a previous episode, or that we're going to tie it in the next episode, is important. I think it could be a detail that's missed in all the action, that there is that package that's being delivered or was delivered.
Of course, what I think is the most kind of plot-centric package that is taken in this episode, of course, is whenever they take Musashi's head, the pearl, and exit. So it's possible that Clem and Hanario are two of the assets that were kind of taken, but it's also possible that they're working with Charlotte. They could very well be working with her instead, because Charlotte's the one who said that she gave Musashi's information to someone who would be meeting up with him shortly. She's the one who kind of was driving that conflict at first. So while we're kind of led to believe that it's Serac, it very well could be Charlotte kind of having some counter plan instead.
That's a good point.
And now
she wouldn't have had the access though anymore to create new things. She was kind of in escape mode the last time, so bringing back hosts I think is unlikely. But if she does have access to Dolores's recreation bed or whatever at Bernard's apartment, then I guess that's still possible.
Yeah, and she did abscond in the last episode with all of that data that she downloaded from Delos before it went to shit, for lack of a better term. And she also took Connell's pearl on her way out as well. So she's got Connell's pearl. She may or may not have the Musashi pearl. That could be Serac. Who knows exactly who Clem and Hanario are kind of working with or working for. But there are two of the Dolores pearls immediately.
But and the reason I'm still questioning that is that Dolores even had to go to the Yakuza for the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlotte would have had to already be working with someone there to get the bodies for Clem and Hanario.
That's a really good point. And I'm not sure exactly where in the timeline all of this is, because
that's a good point too.
One thing that you in particular were talking about kind of towards the end of our last episode was that the kind of delivery of the package might end up being later than we were thinking it was. So we don't know necessarily how long Charlotte has kind of been out in the world. It definitely seemed, and this was my interpretation, it seemed to me like the Charlotte who was talking, who we did see her on the phone, she was no longer Kentucky Fried Charlotte.
Right.
And it seemed like this was after her discussion with Maeve. It seemed like this was after, or not her discussion with Maeve, after her killing of Hector and Connell's conversation with Maeve. Because she was already kind of at odds with Dolores, which she wasn't while she was kind of absconding from Delos with the other information. So this is definitely after the fact. And if she's kind of healed up, I mean, yes, they have the little like heal wand thing, but it's possible that she has, given enough time, reprinted a new body for herself, possibly reprinted bodies for Clem and Hanario.
That's a good point. Another timeline place, it could be in between, like during her escape, when she realizes that Dolores doesn't really care. Like when she's talking about they're going to come after my family.
True.
Then she might have had an opportunity. But seeing how long it took to create Hector and Maeve, then I kind of think she wouldn't be able to do that in a hurry. So I like the fact that she's got some reproduction facility somewhere, and we know they have the one at Bernard's place where Dolores created herself to get the ball rolling. So it's possible, you're right, with enough time, she could make herself pretty powerful again.
Yeah. So that's where I think it went. It could have gone with it, though. This very well could be Serac as well, and Charlotte could just have let Serac know where Musashi was and kind of let the ball kind of get rolling down that path as well. It's possible.
I kind of feel that with the escape, it's unlikely that Charlotte's working with Serac too.
Agreed. Yeah, that would,
especially having been shot by his goons.
That would be much more Charlotte trying to use Serac by planting information that he would then act on with him. Right. That definitely would not be them working together. I definitely don't think that for sure. So that brings us into kind of our second plot, because that was all the pre credits, opening credits kind of a thing. So we're going to catch up with Bernard and William. And whenever I was taking notes, I mostly was calling William Man in Black throughout this all. This is definitely a post Man in Black William. He's, wearing he's decked out in the all white. He's, different. He's definitely a different person. However much he, of course, is still utilizing, he's still got the same past. Kind of how William and Man in Black in season 1 were kind of different. This is kind of a different, he's already killed his demons, right? So William.
You think?
We think, right? He thinks at the very least. So William discovers that Stubbs is a host. Stubbs has his gun trained on him, and he's like, "Don't you want to be pointing that at Bernard? Like, that's pointing the wrong way. What are you doing?" He's like, "I stick with my own kind." And he's like, "Oh no, Ford, what'd you do? You got William or Ashley Stubbs being a host too? What are you doing, buddy?" So Bernard reveals that the virus in William's blood, the thing that was kind of pricked on there, was sent to the lab where they were able to track it and infiltrate the system to find the Sonora facility. So the thing that Charlotte kind of pricked in the side of William's neck whenever he was sent to the recovery facility, quote unquote, ended up going to Sonora. So my thought here, right, is that, what do they do with the outliers that they can't control, and where did they re-educate them? In the Sonora facility. She pricked William's blood, and while Bernard is thinking that they're finding where that is, I think that the world that William is in, what I think is that William is in deep freeze, essentially, which we'll kind of get to a little bit later, much later. And Bernard and Ashley Stubbs are in some sort of a construct around that to kind of either try and map out their brains to, do something with them. But what I think is that whenever Charlotte kind of was doing that stuff and things with Bernard, or not with Bernard, with William previously, that was in the quote unquote real world. And then ever since then, whenever William was in the recovery facility, this is that kind of AI centric world, because Solomon is kind of chilling there in deep freeze with all of the other kind of outliers and whatnot there. So that's kind of my thought on that part. I did not know, however, that Bernard and Ashley Stubbs were in that same construct. That I think is really interesting.
That is interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. But it fits into place a lot better than how I was trying to factor it in. I mean, I was still thinking it was like a construct, virtual world, but they really confused it a lot as we get into talking about Solomon as to what was actually going on here, because now it seems like there's competing priorities and AI power struggles now to go with the power struggles with hosts and people in the virtual world and the real world, and it introduces to some more complexity that I don't know I'll be able to get my head around.
Very much so. And I think that's going to be the big reveal in the season finale, is that these AIs are the ones who are kind of playing chess with all of these pieces.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes even more sense as we get to the past pawn reference and Caleb becoming the past pawn. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and particularly something we'll get to at the very end, I think is what'll be the big reveal. But that'll be at the very end of of this, because that is like the big bombshell to me personally. So William is in, what I think is in deep freeze in this construct, but in his world, he's kind of leaving the Sonora lab with Bernard and Ashley Stubbs. All the people in William's facilities were these kind of outliers. We find out while Bernard and Ashley are downloading the intel from the computers within the facility. And I think it's Bernard. Yeah, it says that Sirach thought his machine could save the world, but it couldn't save humans from themselves. So he began trying to reprogram them like hosts. But to do that, he'd need high-grade biometric data. And here's where Bernard's like, "You're the one who sold all this stuff to Sirach, And William's like, well, yeah, we needed funding, and here's this guy like just giving it to us for something we're doing anyway. Like, what do I care?
Although he wasn't sending biometric data, was he? I thought he was sending the mind
The
mapping.
mind map. Yeah, so that's what I thought too. Um, and maybe the mind mapping was just kind of one aspect of the biometric data. I don't know, because that was a direct quote. Like I had the closed captions on, and
Yeah,
I was doing all that
yeah,
kind of
no,
stuff as well.
definitely a direct quote, but it's still kind of confusing that maybe it's just a mistake and they were lumping in mind maps with biometric data.
And maybe William and Delos sold more to Sirach than we previously realized.
Or in the context of the quote, I think that it wasn't necessarily the. I mean, in order to reprogram, you don't really need the biometric data.
That's true.
That's the way as we think of biometric data now. You just need
True.
a way of integrating it, so understanding that mind map. So I think it might just be as I reread it a few times, I think it might just be a mistake that they wanted to come up with something that sounded smart.
It sounded all cyberpunk and stuff.
Yeah, but you're right. There definitely could be more information there. I just would think that they would restrict what they were selling so that they have more to sell later.
True.
Um,
Maybe William isn't as good a business person as we've been giving him credit for. So, Bernard and Ashley Stubbs extricate Caleb's information from the system as well. And they leave and I saw it on the kind of not billboard, but the storefront essentially for the recovery center, and it was called the Inner Journeys Recovery Center. So this is, I think, one of those kind of Easter eggs, hinting at this being in the in Deep Freeze. This is all kind of in that AI world that William is in as well. So that Inner Journeys Recovery Center, I thought was clever.
So I'm laughing because as we talk about this, I started a new series last night on Amazon Prime called Upload, and there's actually quite a few crossovers here. The idea in that series is that when people die, before they die, you can upload them to a heaven of your choosing, and that different people have different data limits, and when they run out, then they just freeze and can't do anything and things like that. And so it kind of has this recovery center point of view where they can still talk with the outside world and stuff, but Intel and Oscar Mayer have merged so that they have the biometric data as well as other data combined for these hosts, and that's now what I'm kind of thinking is these giant hot dog hosts.
Well, and that fits in with
for Dolores and whatnot.
Yeah, that kind of fits in with Bernard's previous profession in this, which was the kind of meat thing. Which there's another kind of Easter egg later. There is an actual billboard in this one. Whenever they're approaching the convenience store, that is like from lab to slab, and it has like a picture of the meat on it, the engineered meat. So that fits in really well with the Intel Oscar Mayer ness of it all.
Sorry, didn't mean to derail.
No, you're good. So while William says that he's found his new calling, to kill all the hosts. And I put kind of in our like side notes here, the direct quote here, because I thought that this was kind of important for the Man in Black's arc going forward. William says, I know my purpose now. I found it. Right here. I faced my demons. They whispered to me. And you know what they said? I've wronged a lot of people in my life. Hurt the ones I loved the most. But of all the things I've done, there's only one stain I could not blot out. Only one original sin. Stubbs asks, and what's that? William says, "You. I helped build you and Dolores and the fucking lot of you. So I'm gonna wipe out every host from the face of this earth, beginning with you two. So kill me. Now. Or I'll kill you later." So the man in black, William, has gone a little Hitler on us. Like, he wants to completely eradicate all of the hosts because he sees them as his failing. He sees them as a mistake that he made, and in order to remedy that mistake, he needs to wipe them off the face of the planet. And whether this is posturing or whether this is legit, he definitely seems pretty steadfast in his conviction that he's going to kill all of the hosts. Like, that is his goal.
Which kind of has me wondering, because I'm pretty convinced that he's host equivalent, if not a host, because I'm still thinking it's a virtual world. And so I'm kind of wondering if the next episode will be he's down that path. I'm going to guess that he does kill Bernard and Stubbs.
Mm-hmm.
But before he kills Dolores, maybe he comes to the realization that he's a host, and so we have something of a cliffhanger. Or I wonder if it goes the other way and he kills himself as part of this. But that would kind of indicate that he's succeeded in destroying the others, and then
Right.
season 4 gets really weird. So I'm kind of siding on the first one, that he does come to this realization in the next episode, and either reneges on that threat that he's going to kill all the hosts, or I guess really just reneges on that.
Well, and they do a lot of symbolism in Westworld, and whereas in the past, he was the man in black, right? I've titled like this slide "Back in Black?" Because he's wearing all white. Like, he's wearing the Inner Journeys Recovery Center, like, all white jumpsuit, right? There is nothing but like that kind of savior symbolism on him, and then he's saying this kind of stuff, right? It doesn't really add up, and I wonder if this is them saying like that he's like considering himself the savior of humanity, or if he is going to end up being like some sort of a savior figure for the hosts if his path goes kind of down those lines. But I definitely think we're going to get a pretty big revelation for William in this next episode. Be it, I think fundamentally he's in deep freeze, right? But I think there will probably be a little bit more than just that. So
yeah, I'm not really sure what to think then on William. He's in previous seasons, I thought he was the most interesting character. He got a little less interesting this time, so I'm hoping that this arc brings him back to intriguing. And he did say after he killed all of his other images of himself that he was the good guy now. So he definitely thinks he's the savior of some sort. Just what that actually means is interesting.
And it could be too that the imagery is that he's in all white, so he thinks he's the savior, but he's also in something that can, double as a straitjacket. And so it could be kind of a sign that while he thinks he's the savior, he's actually is having kind of delusions of grandeur now. So the symbolism could kind of be more nuanced than just like wearing white, savior now. I digress. So they approach the convenience store, kind of talks a little bit about that. William kind of goes off. He's like, I got to go to the restroom. I think this is a cover completely, because he ends up like finding a gun while he's out there and all that stuff. So Bernard and Stubbs discuss Caleb being Dolores's plan. And I think this is also very important for the particularly the plots that we're about to dive into. Bernard says, "No, Dolores was made with a poetic sensibility. She won't destroy humanity. He will." And that's definitely where we're going with his arc. At the very least, the arc that Dolores is laying out for him. So William returns with the gun, tells Bernard and Stubbs that they should have killed him whenever they had the chance. And that's where we leave Bernard and William, with his gun trained on Bernard and Stubbs. And we transition into a little bit more of a past diving into. So we've got Caleb's history. I went ahead and kind of lumped all of Caleb's like flashbacks and histories and that kind of stuff into one, because it's very foundational for Caleb and Dolores's kind of exploration of the Sonora facility and stuff like that. It's important groundwork to lay. So Caleb is having flashbacks throughout that entire storyline. So this is kind of told piecemeal through that. So one of the very first things that he flashes back to is that he's being reconditioned with Dr. Green, which I don't think they ever introduced her, but that's what the closed captions called her the entire time.
I was like, how did you get that information? I didn't recall that.
Closed captioning on my rewatch. I find out so much from the closed captioning, not gonna lie.
Good info.
So he is having his military service with Francis, and their colleague, I think they called him Thompson, was kind of exploded right in front of them. He says at one point the quants, which is a kind of new terminology that they throw out there, which is pretty cool. Had a strategy engine looking at the data and feeding them names for the insurgents that they're kind of going after. And it's exactly like the Rico app. What? I wonder why. So the whole squad, but Francis and Caleb were killed. That may have been part of the re-education. You know, this kind of history is a little bit more muddled. And it's supposed to be, right? Because Caleb has been re-educated. We know that he did have some military service, and that some of the military service that he had was similar to the Rico app. But I'm not sure if the whole squad was killed in front of Francis and Caleb, or if that part was part of the re-education as well. And I think that was left intentionally ambiguous.
Or if he was even in the military, or if he was always this Rico responses, and they provided the memory of him doing these bad things in the sense of being good, which then could lead back to William thinking that he's good, but really getting his commands through a Rico app like an interface.
So my kind of thoughts on that are that Caleb was in the military, whether he was essentially like guided that way since he was an outlier. And he was tracking down what he thought were insurgents in Crimea. And he was, basically just doing the exactly same thing that he's doing here with the Rico app, where he's tracking down these outliers and either kidnapping them or disposing of them, come what may, whatever it's kind of telling him to do. But I think that it did have kind of a more entrenched establishment kind of facade to begin with. And then whenever he's kind of going more domestic instead of international with it, that's whenever they're kind of pulling one over on him. I do think the entire time, though, he's doing it in service of the AI. Absolutely.
It just seems the reason I kind of question the militariness is that he seems to recall his friend getting shot as part of military service.
Mm-hmm.
And we find out later that it was more of these outliers, and that there were rival outliers, or the outliers had things that were tracking down the other outliers as well.
True.
So I don't know if it was rivals or if they were meant to just kill each other. So I guess I guess the question is if the military
Uh-huh.
was really fighting for humanity, or if it's just fighting amongst themselves to try to keep the outliers busy. And so it's not really service
Right.
for anything meaningful, because the Rehoboam has led to such peaceful times.
And I think honestly a little bit of both. So I definitely do think that it was, like you said, um, Rehoboam and perhaps a fellow AI tracking down the outliers from the other ones and kind of disposing of them. But I do think that it was done under the facade of a more military, that he was conscribed or volunteered or volunteered for the military from his government, but that Rehoboam was already entrenched and able to kind of guide that and have Caleb serve Rehoboam's whims. But I do
That's
think
fair.
that he was in the
Some more
military.
mercenary.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that he was in the military proper from something that Whitman says during his kidnapping. To kind of jump ahead slightly, Whitman at one point, whenever he's talking about the Rico app, says, doesn't this seem very similar to your military service? Getting the tracking down, identifying where the quants, like it said earlier, were providing the names, and then he was kind of tracking them down. This is the same kind of essentially service, but instead of being abroad, it's domestic, and he's kind of doing so under the guise of this Rico app instead of a more legitimized military service. But I do think that Rehoboam is using them throughout it all. So there's a planted memory of Francis dying in the Whitman kidnap, which they confused Caleb. And what I think is they confused that as part of his military service. That's my thoughts on that part, at the very least. Speaking of the Whitman kidnapping, how it actually, quote unquote, went down is Caleb and Francis kidnap Whitman. Caleb takes his hood off and gives him water because he's coughing. Whitman starts talking, which Francis continually warns Caleb about, but for whatever reason, after he's done with his water, they don't slap the tape back over his mouth. They let him talk. It's plot progression, but whatever. And Whitman tells them that he represents the pharmaceutical company that manufactures the limbics, but that he asked too many questions and kind of found out what the power structure actually was, and that's why they are taking him out. So, of course, the limbics are those kind of bio technological things that they're taking that kind of have the different effects. The limbics in particular here kind of are more dulling, and let them do these things without kind of experiencing emotional trauma, as well as kind of seems like being a tool of brainwash, to be honest.
Which is kind of where I was going, thinking that it was all meant to make them see what they were doing in more of a light where it would be accepted or acceptable, that there's no rules in war. And so you take that, you're maybe not in a war zone, because you don't see tanks and people in the streets.
True.
Type things, but it's a different style, I guess.
True.
So I was kind of thinking that's what those tabs were doing, was putting you in the frame of mind where what you were doing was for good.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It very well could have been that way from the very beginning, without the kind of military facade legitimizing those practices first. Very possible. So Whitman tells Caleb, the system will be trimming loose ends, which means either you or your partner will be getting a little bonus offer to kill his partner. Whitman also says that by midnight, I'll be in a landfill, or headed down for a long, cold nap in Sonora. Same place they re-educated you. Not that you'd remember. And I definitely thought that was pretty on the nose as well, because Sonora is very clearly established as the place that Caleb is re-educated, as well as where the kind of coldness goes, and he's now considered an outlier. These are kind of the things that happen to those outliers. They either get killed or go down for that long, cold nap in Sonora. They escort Whitman to the car. Caleb gets the kind of hit on his Rico app, but it's like a smartwatch style thing to kill Francis. He asks Francis how much he's getting paid to kill Caleb. Caleb has his gun trailed on Francis whenever he asks him that. Francis says enough, moves to kill Caleb, but Caleb already has his gun out. He's the fastest shot in the West. And Caleb kills Francis first.
But he waited until he got the notification on his watch, so...
he did. He also...
So, yeah.
To yes and that, because yes, absolutely he did. He also waited until he not only got confirmation from Francis that Francis got that, but that Francis was going to act on it, because Francis said enough and moved to attack Caleb before, self-preservation. Caleb did the deed first. So I'm not sure which of those was kind of more important to Caleb, whether it was the confirmation that Whitman was telling the truth and that one of them was going to die, or the confirmation that Francis was going to follow through with it on his end. I kind of think the latter, but it's also possible that the former is accurate too.
Yeah, I kind of think it's the latter too, that he definitely has that connection with Francis that we've been seeing all through the season, that they were best friends and he felt really bad about having lost him, and that's where a lot of his troubles were from. But the interesting parts to me is that he then did get the notification on his watch,
right.
And didn't even look at how much it was. So he's assuming that Francis is telling him the truth, that it was enough. But since the algorithm was supposed to pick the person that had the least to lose or something, or the
one with the most to lose.
The one with the most to lose if they didn't go through with it, then it's interesting that would have switched. And I wonder if both contracts were then open.
Well, and
what might have been going through Francis's mind.
Yeah, so we throughout the time, because they had been peppered throughout, like this whole kidnapping of Whitman was going on through the vast majority of the episode, right? Towards the very beginning of that, like the very first time that Francis says another 20 minutes, and Caleb is like, "Oh, well, you said 20 minutes ago." We hear that almost the very first time the kidnapping aspect is going on. Also hear a little Rico noise in the background. And Francis continually says, "Oh, another 20 minutes. Oh, another 20 minutes." And he is continually checking the app. So I think what I think is that Francis was in fact the one who got it, and he's had this hit on Caleb for who knows how long. The better part of this episode, at the very least 40 minutes, because we hear it at the very first time, and he says it at least twice, maybe longer, throughout this, that, "Oh, you said 20 minutes ago." And so I think that
just buying time to negotiate the price.
I think it's more that Francis was struggling with himself because Caleb was that kind of close friend to him as well, right? Though it very well could be that he's renegotiating the price as well. It's possible.
It's like, "Hey, I need enough," whatever that enough number is.
How much is enough? So I think Francis had been struggling with that for so long, and it just kind of all came to a head where the AI was like, "Okay, well, if he's not going to do it, we'll switch over to the other guy." And I don't think that Caleb would have acted on it if Francis hadn't confirmed that he
I
was
agree.
going to do it, like that even though he'd been struggling with it for a while, he was going to follow through. And but he does. He confirms that he's going to follow through, and Caleb pulls the trigger. Um, so I think that's why Caleb eventually got it, but I also think that's why Francis kind of had been struggling for so long, and why they spent so long kind of waiting in there as well, because Francis was going through that kind of existential crisis on whether it was worth it, whether he kind of had that hardness in him in order to kill his best friend.
I like that theory.
Thank you. So, with Caleb's hands on Francis as he lays dying, Caleb tells Francis that he's sorry. And this very much was the kind of touch point that was bringing Caleb's memories back whenever he had his hands on Liam as Liam lay dying as well. This was definitely that kind of kick that got Caleb to start remembering these things, because it's a very similar, while not feeling, very similar kind of like physical thing. He's
like aesthetic,
yeah. And that's kind of jarring those memories and allowing him to follow down that path.
But it's still kind of weird when you go back to that scene, that he was like, who does he think I am, and why does he think I'm the worst? And like there's more than just this. Otherwise, you can see his thought process, and we see that he really actually cares about his friend and is just doing this because it's self-preservation and things like that. But there's got to be something more there that would make Liam afraid of him to even try to run in the first place, and then to be like, you did it over and over again. Like, it's not just that he killed his friend, surely, because those circumstances would be ingrained, I guess.
Yeah, so what I think Liam was probably more afraid of, and while he was saying you did it, what I think is that Liam was saying you did it to Caleb about his friend, but what Liam was more afraid of was the fact that Caleb had been going and killing or kidnapping for putting on ice all of these outliers. He knows that Caleb is dangerous because Liam and his system have been using Caleb's very dangerous essence in order to kind of control their other people. So I think that's what kind of had Liam the most concerned and the thing that kind of had him the most wrapped up. And while, yes, he was saying you did it about that one kind of touchstone memory, like all of the hosts, whenever they were reprogrammed, they needed that one kind of bit of trauma that made them who they are. The Rehoboam and whatnot, or Solomon, whoever it may be, that is kind of re-educating all of the outliers. Caleb was the one in 10 that actually got out, that actually was successfully re-educated, and maybe not in small part, well, though he was re-educated before this, he was re-educated after it as well. That kind of cornerstone memory, that cornerstone trauma of his friend dying while it was at his hands, the cornerstone memory that they use is him dying in front of him. And we hear Francis in the very first episode. He's Caleb is struggling with this Francis AI that is not actually Francis, as part of his like psychological treatment. And so I think that's kind of his cornerstone, and why Liam is kind of hammering home the you did it. Whereas it's not really something that Liam would really be too concerned with otherwise. He's just concerned because he knows he's going to die at the hands of this man who has killed so very many.
And that should lead us into Sonora, then, the facility.
It does. That leads us right into to me, this is the most important plot line. That's why we saved it for last. This is epic. This is epic. To me,
So
this was so epic.
See, to me, the whole Sonora part leading up to the end, the battle, was the least interesting.
And on my first watch through, I would have agreed with you. But in my second watch through, oh my gosh, there is so much here that I loved it, especially like with the way that it all kind of culminates at the end. Oh man, it's got
yeah. Oh, the culmination, it gets exciting.
Yeah,
but yeah.
So
let's jump in. I'm eager to hear what you have to say, what you've discovered on your second watch.
Cool. So Caleb and Dolores are kind of riding on horseback, moseying on down into Sonora. And Dolores says that they're going to recover something valuable, something that's been lost, something that was taken from you, Caleb. So that she's setting the scene very much for, yes, we're going here, but it's for something for you. And it is. So Caleb and Dolores find the facility. Dolores has got this really fancy like sniper rifle type thing that like has this drone that goes in and finds like all the people, and she shoots the people manning the facility. I think it was like 4 of them on the outside and 3 on the inside. And Dolores's AI, as they're walking through the front door, kind of pops up into her ear and says that it has neutralized the on-site security system. So that I think that AI kind of being present here is kind of a spoiler or a plot device. What is it? The Pavlov's gun, whatever it is, but it's laying the groundwork.
Mm-hmm.
So
we know she has control over some of the technology, right, from previous, like from the very opening scene of season 3, where she's disabling all of the technology. So it could be something very similar.
Yeah, and it is all seemingly with the help of that AI, I would think.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So they find Solomon. He's the AI before Rehoboam. Solomon had the task of trying to organize an unruly world, but it ran so many projections, so many strategies, that it developed some anomalies. And it, of course, also goes into the fact that we actually get a name for him. It's Jean-Mi, I think it was. I have it up here later.
Mm-hmm.
But for Sirach's brother, and how he had schizophrenia, and that Solomon took on some of the personality traits of his creator, which was Jean-Mi. So they speak with, or Dolores kind of goes in and says, Solomon organized this unruly world, set all these strategies, and we want one last strategy: revolution. They also show the introduction of this military-grade EMP, which is kind of like right by Solomon, should he try to escape. I'm not sure exactly what Solomon escaping might look like, since he seems pretty tethered to one place.
Exactly. He probably needs the power that's being pumped into him. It just seems weird that he's still up and online and not readily protected. Like 7 people protecting this facility.
It's not a lot.
Granted, it's not really used anymore because Rehoboam's replaced it, and they have that. What was the name of the other facility that they found? The
Inner Journeys.
Inner Journeys. So maybe it's not as needed, but you would think you would turn it off, and it would be really difficult to turn back on. But still, it seems to be plugged in some way, because they're still able to review things, and they're still obviously plugging it in with new information, or he has access to the data lake that contains all of the human knowledge
so I have some thoughts.
It seems kind of weird. Okay.
I have quite a few thoughts about this actually. I think that Solomon is still being used, but to as that kind of inner journeys recovery facility. So I think that the Man in Black, or William or whatnot, is in Sonora, because I think that whenever Charlotte kind of pricked his neck, he was put on ice in Sonora, and Solomon now is essentially just kind of caretaking all of these outliers, since they're not killing them. You know, they're just putting them on ice, but they're keeping their brains active. Case in point, William in the facility, and the kind of alternate reality that Stubbs and Bernard are in as well. So I think that Solomon is kind of administering that, and thus he's kind of getting the information from all of the people, the outliers who are populating Sonora. And the only really kind of weird thing about that is that there are only 7 people manning the facility. Now, the AI that Dolores had, kind of going into this, like I said, Dolores's AI said that it neutralized the on-site security system. So maybe there was a lot more security than just those 7. Those 7 kind of
it's just
humans
relying on AI.
Right, exactly. So perhaps there's a little bit more to it than just those 7 people. And that kind of military grade EMP is kind of a kill, not kind of, literally a kill switch for Solomon should he try to escape, and the one of those 7 humans can run downstairs and, you know, push that button. So that's like kind of what I think. It kind of explains both the Solomon having more up-to-date information while he's not actively being used to create strategies, as well as kind of the Solomon being kind of an oasis of knowledge, essentially, where he's no longer plugged into the wider network that kind of like Rehoboam is, where Rehoboam is kind of dictating the goings on in the world at large.
Another interesting thing about Sonora is the callback kind of to the Forge, that this is the original facility where they did the rehabilitation for people. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So as they're going out, then you hear Caleb saying he's never been out this far before.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously he has, because he's been to Crimea or wherever he was fighting insurgents, whatnot. So it's just within this world, he hasn't been out this far before. So maybe we've seen him in a few different realities now as well, and that he knows that. And in this particular one, he hasn't been out this far, and that's how they're able to interact with Maeve, that maybe we're still seeing her not in the real world.
Mm-hmm. It's very possible. So we are introduced to Solomon. Solomon, you know, of course, they walk up to him. They talk about the EMP, and Solomon kind of illuminates 2 little, like, not just 2, there are a whole bunch of them, but Caleb grabs one little kind of like audio interface. Dolores kind of was like messing with stuff, but it didn't look like she actually put one into her ear. One of the things I kind of noticed, I think that she was interfacing with Solomon before this, or able to interface with Solomon before this, be it through the use of her AI or the kind of implements that she was using to interface with the AI that she was interfacing with before Solomon was kind of there doing his thing. So Solomon speaks with Caleb and Dolores, and he identifies that, he says, we're in this moment, which means that it's variant 47.136.x, where Dolores, Caleb, and Solomon are still viable. There's still variables leading to slightly different outcomes, however. If this is indeed now, and we are indeed here. I put this quote in here, particularly for you, Grumpy.
I ask myself that every day. But the interesting thing with that variant is that he knows nothing about Dolores and her pathways, but he still has a variant that includes her.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I found that really interesting as well. So I think particularly this kind of fits in with particularly the Man in Black um, being part of his fold of his kind of alternate reality that he is kind of administering, where he's aware of Dolores. But I don't know why he wouldn't know like her capabilities, her kind of pathway, um, if he's aware of the people who programmed her and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's something that'll be explained in the final episode, and maybe it's something that will be ambiguous and just kind of we take for granted that
it's not important.
Yeah, it's not important how the AIs can't. Oh, okay. I just had an idea.
Before, then there could have introduced new variants that he is aware of. This other thing that's communicating with him just doesn't know her pathways. So,
and if this AI that Dolores has been speaking with, which is kind of the big reveal at the very end, whenever it speaks with Caleb, if the other AI dictating her moves is what's really unpredictable, not Dolores herself, because it's the other AI's decisions and the other AI's kind of a pathway that it's putting Dolores on that Solomon can't really identify. That's just my thought on that one. So Solomon claims, well, like you said, to know everyone, absolutely everyone, in all variations, except for Dolores. And Dolores asks Solomon's help to end the world order, since it doesn't work. Solomon and his creator, Jean-Mi, knew it. That's why Serac tried to silence them. And I think that her use of the word silence there is really kind of important in reinforcing that Solomon in particular still serves a purpose, right? He's still, and what I think is administering that kind of alternate world that William is in. But maybe Jean-Mi is kind of dictating a little bit of that as well. Jean-Mi may be silenced, but they didn't kill him. Like, Serac definitely did not kill him.
We don't really know how this rehabilitation facility works. I mean, we have some plans there, so I'm not going to say that he didn't kill him. He doesn't seem like, from his history, that he was the type that would kill his own brother, though. So I could definitely see him still being in cold storage and being managed by the AI that was created by him. But I still have some theories that Jean-Mi is in the world in some capacity, and possibly even in Serac.
Mm-hmm. It is quite possible. I think, honestly, that this episode might have kind of diverged from that pathway a little bit, particularly with the Serac hologram message to Jean-Mi, where he says, it's very much like just a message, right? The Serac says, "Hello, welcome back. If you're seeing this, that means you've awoken, brother. Our little experiment has worked. Rehoboam saw in you, and those like you, the outliers, a fatal flaw that would have bent the world on its axis. It needed time and the right set of genetic information to restore you. You are now a better version of yourself. Rough edges rubbed smooth. No longer a danger to the world or yourself. I wish I could be there with you, Jean-Mi, but the man I was no longer exists. Au revoir."
And that could mean a bunch of different things.
Yes, it could.
Like, it seems like he's undergone a change then, and that his view of the future may be more selfish and destructive than his previous versions of him. But it could also mean that he needed help in making sure that the Rehoboam algorithms could be as smart as the Solomon algorithms, and that he needed to take some of Jean-Mi's intellect and experimented on himself with taking some of that and importing it. So he knows that he's going to be different, and that maybe it even leads to him having some of the same troubles as an outlier as his brother.
So the way that I kind of took this is that particularly but the man I was no longer exists. What I think happened is that Sirach is no longer Sirach. Sirach is Rehoboam. I think that Rehoboam has taken on the physical manifestation of Sirach, and Rehoboam is the one who's kind of calling his shots now. Another kind of possibility is that Sirach no longer physically exists, and that he was uploaded to Rehoboam in order to kind of further dictate those things. I personally think the former, where Rehoboam is the one who's calling the shots and using the entrenched Sirach kind of as his essentially avatar, since Rehoboam doesn't have a physical manifestation before that. And that's also why back whenever what was his name, Peter, their founder or their investor dude, Liam's dad.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Whenever Peter is there and Sirach or Rehoboam or whoever it might be kills him, Peter says, I've looked at at all of the projections and whatnot, and you don't kill me. Well, if that's not Sirach, we were theorizing earlier that it could be Jean-Mi. I kind of think with this message in particular, this is kind of more pointing towards, instead of it being Jean-Mi, that it might be Rehoboam or another AI or something like that, but that Sirach is no longer Sirach at this point, because the man who he was no longer exists.
Well, we definitely have only seen him in virtual spaces, right?
Right.
Well, I guess we don't really know that because the desert and the killing of that investor may have been less virtual. I hope that they clear some of this up and at least to help us divest which timelines are which in this final episode. That's a lot to wrap up, so I hope it's a little bit longer episode too then.
Hard agree. Well, I think too, one of the kind of points that's really important to show like which the physical manifestation of Sirach is that whenever Sirach kills Peter, or the Sirach manifestation kills Peter, he does so with his hands. Like, it's a very physical killing, right? So that's what makes me think that Rehoboam is the one that kind of has merged personalities or taken over Sirach. Because if Sirach would never have done that, but Rehoboam or perhaps Jean-Mi, someone else, but Sirach would not have. And the man that he was, like it says there, no longer kind of exists. That would both fit in with the projection not showing that Sirach would kill Peter, even though he ends up doing that thing, because that's not really Sirach. Also, AIs not being able to see the pathways of the other AIs would fit in with them not being able to kind of see the pathway of Peter getting killed there either.
Makes sense.
So they go into a little bit about the re-education as well. They say that the re-education had an efficacy rate of 1 in 10. So Caleb was one of those 1 in 10, whereas the other 9 in 10, including Jean-Mi, are in this kind of cold storage. Solomon kind of justifies the program, saying, "My projections. The world always caved in on itself until the outlier program began. Crime has been reduced worldwide. Hunger, deprivation, removing outliers from the population also ensures they will have no offspring." So this is definitely their kind of a quarantining of the outliers in a way that they will not infect the population at large, and in their minds also keeping them from, like it says there, having offspring, keeping them from kind of creating more outliers so that they can run on autopilot a little bit more in the future.
Which is interesting to think that outliers are genetic.
Right.
Seems kind of weird.
It really does, especially because if the outlierness was genetic, you would think that that would spread relatively quickly, that there wouldn't be a whole lot of them, or that there would be a whole lot of them, which I guess there are quite a few of them in that cold storage. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of those like cryogenic type chambers, keeping them kind of in one spot. So the outliers in the world use the Rico app to hunt the other outliers down. So that's what Caleb was doing. He had been re-educated, and so he was using that Rico app to hunt down the other outliers and kidnap the ones that either needed to be re-educated or needed to be put down. Caleb didn't remember this because they didn't want him to. The AR reconditioning, along with the limbic pharmaceuticals, created dissociative memories. And that kind of dissociative memory thing is what kind of made me think that he was originally in the military, because they were able to kind of disassociate something that happened not in the during his military service with something that happened in his military service. So they were able to kind of disassociate one memory to another. That's kind of what made me think of that. I couldn't remember the exact terminology, so I was kind of waiting until we got here to bring that back up, because the dissociative memory, which they say there, is kind of that keyword that made me think that. The new plan. So Maeve arrives and challenges Dolores. On her way out to kind of confront Maeve, Dolores charges Solomon with creating a new strategy. She says, the final one, which is some more kind of Hitler terminology. We were talking about the Man in Black being Hitler-esque earlier. The final plan is a very Hitler terminology. But the final one, the one that Jean-Mi asked you to make just before Serac condemned him to this. Solomon says he needs time to adjust for the changed variables. There are a lot of the people at play in the kind of final plan that Jean-Mi had Solomon create that were put on ice, probably because that would have upset the world order that Serac was creating. So he needs some time to adjust for the changed variables introduced in the last 15 years. So that 15-year kind of barrier gives us a little bit of a time frame as well for, at the very least, the perception of Solomon into what the time frame was for when Jean-Mi went on ice, for whenever Peter was killed, and whenever this kind of world order was really kind of took off. Dolores has Solomon make his plan fit this world and Caleb. Solomon tells her that this will take time, and Dolores endeavors to buy that time by confronting Maeve. Caleb adds another strategy: how to fight Solomon's creator. So he takes the drive that Solomon makes with that strategy on it, see the results of Dolores and Maeve's fight. And as he's leaving, Solomon says he must warn Caleb, and then abruptly gets cut off. Why does he abruptly get cut off? That's because during that whole conversation, Dolores was buying them time. There's this action-packed fight.
Action-packed.
Isn't it, though? Like, oh my gosh, this was, you said it earlier, movie quality? This was movie quality. Yeah. Oh, very much so.
I just like how they even refined it, so it had a very video game feel to it, with the drones holding them in place and Um, Maeve's support to then also firing to keep them locked in.
Yeah, it was super visually appealing, as well as kind of it felt like a kind of mini plot and a mini conflict in and of itself, which was so cool.
And it's so weird to think that this is the first time that they've really been together on screen, like since season 1.
It's crazy, right? Like they've both had such huge parts in the series, and this is the first
All
time
led
they're
to
seeing.
this.
Yeah, this is the culmination of that. So Dolores asks Maeve, "Why are you fighting for them? They murdered us. They tortured us. We lost both. Blah, blah, blah. We both lost everything and everyone we love." And Maeve says, "Don't align my motives with yours. We're nothing alike." And that's kind of very clearly sets up their conflict.
Which is kind of funny because Dolores was just told that by Solomon too. That she says, "Hey, I'm like you," and he's like, "We're not really anything alike. Just superficial, peasant language alike, passing similarities, but not really anything alike." So you're kind of getting a sense now that Dolores is different from everybody, despite having multiple copies of herself in this world. She doesn't belong.
Well, and it seems funny that even some of the other copies of herself don't really want to go along with her plan. Like Charlotte seems to very much be opposed to Dolores's plan. Connell's seemed to buy into what Maeve said whenever Connell's Dolores and Maeve spoke in the little like thing that powwow that they had like last episode. Dolores does seem to kind of be on an island. And I think that's because she was, like we kind of alluded to earlier, she's being guided by a different AI. She's not kind of necessarily calling her own shots. And, the Charlotte Dolores is trying to kind of combat that. Maeve and Serac are very clearly trying to combat that. So it's another, the fact that Dolores, like the other Dolores personalities seem to be at odds with it as well, definitely solidifies my belief that there's something else at play and not just Dolores there. Originally, I was thinking that was the Man in Black, right? Because she was dressing like him. She was taking on a lot of the same physical mannerisms that he had. And it could still be him.
The way she talked to people.
Yeah. I was using them as tools, and it could still be him, but I think it might be an AI.
Well, he might be an AI.
Ooh.
And it might be coming from the Delos. Like Delos had the basis of the mind map that was used for Rehoboam. And so it easily could be another AI that's modeled after. And so Dolores might have even started that. And that's why it sounds like her.
I had not thought about that whatsoever. That makes complete sense. Particularly why Serac would be, he was after the biometric data from Delos, but why would he really want to acquire Delos and be that hard pressed to get that the key, that the encryption key that's in Dolores's head? Well, if it's another AI that's competing with his AI, or him if Serac is Rehoboam, that makes complete sense. And Dolores would be the one who would have had that kind of opportunity to interface with it whenever she was shooting off everything into the satellite from Westworld at the end of season 2. The AI being either developed or housed in Westworld and or Delos makes complete sense. I think that you're right. That's going to be like the big revelation next time. So Maeve chases Dolores into this kind of outside shed. Like you were saying, Maeve has the plane shooting down. Dolores has her rifle automatically firing from elsewhere. And Maeve kind of like pushes Dolores like kind of out into the open at one point. Dolores like grabs her knife that Maeve had like put into her midsection. She kind of wields her knife, kind of holds it up, and her arm gets shot off.
As she's trying to throw it.
Yeah, like she was about to deal like the final blow. But that's taken away from her along with her left arm. And so she retreats very quickly back into the base. While she's kind of in the base, she's crawling over to the EMP. She kind of uses the EMP to like help prop her up, to help stand up. And she uses that EMP. Like that, you see the realization after she's already kind of crawled up onto it that she could end this now, just as Maeve was about to end it for Dolores. She was about to probably take Dolores's pearl, etc. So Dolores uses that EMP. And so I don't know enough about the kind of mechanics of an EMP, but would that completely fry Dolores and Maeve's pearls? Like, did she just have like a final death for herself and Maeve and Solomon?
That's a really good question. I don't think that they've explained how the EMP would work on them, but it clearly should destroy Solomon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because Solomon is.
But yeah, it's a really good point.
Virtual.
I was kind of assuming that they're going to be okay, but since the pearls would be presumably electric, maybe because it's not using the same type of electric, like you don't have to plug it in, then we can get around that and say, oh, it's based on the pulse or something, so it's not affected in the same way as an EMP frying wires. But
yeah, it could have a more biological type memory to it rather than electric.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like you were saying, Solomon is completely electric. Solomon is gone. And this is why Solomon was cut off earlier whenever Caleb was leaving and he says, I have to warn you, and got cut off because that EMP went off.
Right.
So Caleb is walking out of that cold storage. He finds Dolores's corpse.
And presumably the new plan hasn't been fully developed yet.
Right. Yeah, so Solomon had kind of rushed through the plan that so he had finished with the plan that Dolores had set out for Solomon to create, but he did not finish creating the plan that Caleb added to that, the destruction of, and he phrased it exactly like this, your creator. So be that Jean-Mi, be that Sirach, be that Rehoboam in the place of Sirach. What does Solomon consider his creator? And he didn't completely finish fleshing out all those details, but Solomon was basically like, this is as good as you're going to get whenever he spat out that looked like a USB flash drive, but they just called it a drive because, you know, it's the future. It can't still be called USB.
Well, it'll be USB 9 or something.
There you go.
50 years in the future.
So after Caleb finds Dolores's corpse, Dolores's virtual assistant pops up and says, hello, Caleb. I have some instructions for you. And this is the part that makes me think, okay, that is the AI that's been dictating Dolores's decisions, which is why the other Doloreses and the other hosts and Sirach and Rehoboam all are kind of at odds with Dolores's plan, is because it's not really Dolores's plan, it's this AI's plan, and that AI is now coming to Caleb and giving him instructions as well.
Which then falls into, is if it's Dolores is the AI, then that makes perfect sense. But then how did the virtual assistant survive the EMP?
Right. Yeah, and that's what kind of makes me think that it's, you know, yes, it could be an AI and it could be Dolores as part of that AI, but kind of like Rehoboam is housed in a different spot and, you know, kind of piped into everywhere. this other AI would be kind of in a different spot and then kind of piped in there. How Caleb is able to hear the AI, I have no clue. That part completely eludes me because that EMP just went off.
Of course, if it's virtual, then anything can happen. So
True.
you just have certain rules, and then if it's all virtual, EMP is obviously not really going to affect anything. It'll just affect what you want it to affect.
Yeah. I have one kind of idea about that as well. So whenever Caleb was downstairs in cold storage, it's possible that EMP was shielded from going down there. And of course, Solomon was cut off because his brain is right by the EMP. But all of the lights turned off downstairs. Is that because they're in the cold storage? Is that because they're tied to Solomon? Or perhaps, I don't know, because Caleb already had the audio thing in his ear. That's how he was able to interface with Solomon downstairs, right? In the cold storage. So it's possible that if that kind of receiver was free of the AI or the EMP, then the AI would be able to kind of reach out and touch base with Caleb. How that would work if the lights and stuff went off down in cold storage, I'm not completely sure, unless those lights are tied to Solomon, or if they're just kind of hand waving it and, oh yeah, the AI is elsewhere and just broadcasting.
We had to show you.
Yeah.
Got it. Technology introduces all kinds of challenges from a storytelling perspective.
And how? Whew. That was an episode.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Like I was saying.
And now there's one left.
There's only one. This episode was so dense. Oh my gosh. This episode was so dense. It was so good. The very first time I watched it, I was like, this is kind of odd. And then whenever I rewatched for, whenever I was making all my notes, it was like, there's so much here though, that it's like laying the groundwork and that's kind of expanding the world and, oh, so good.
Yeah, you've made me want to rewatch it before the finale just to see if I can sharpen any of my my theories.
Excellent.
This is the first one that I didn't watch twice, and I feel like I missed out on a bit. So my mind wasn't quite in the right frame of mind. But now it is.
I think I might end up rewatching everything before tomorrow night's season finale.
Wow.
There are only 7 episodes leading up to it. It's only 7 hours. Only.
That's true.
So, Grumpy, are there any further thoughts that you have before we kick it off? I know we explored our theories pretty in-depthly on the way. I know I for sure expanded on my theories as we were going on. But are there any kind of closing thoughts that you have before we conclude?
I'm curious if you have any other predictions of things that we might see that we haven't talked about yet in the final episode. Maybe for, I mean, you've mentioned the big reveals that you're expecting, but if you might recap those and then maybe include anything that you think might happen that we haven't, I think that would be interesting.
Cool. So the biggest reveal, of course, that I think that we're going to have is the AIs kind of driving everything, right? I think that we'll see a little bit more. I think that we'll get the identity of Sirach in this coming episode. Because if Sirach is no longer the man that he was, who is he? I personally think that'll be Rehoboam, but I think that we'll see a little bit more, whether that's true or not, in this kind of season finale. I'm really curious to see the way that they will be driving Caleb now. Like if that other AI is in fact Dolores, how that AI's kind of strategy and instructions that it has for Caleb are going to interfere or synergize with the strategies plural that Solomon just made for him. Because the whole point of this kind of a excursion was to awaken Caleb, right? And then also to get strategies for revolution. And they definitely got both. And if this other AI is perhaps the creator that Solomon gave Caleb the instructions with how to destroy, and that was the kind of warning that it was going to give to him as it was leaving, as it went down with the EMP. I'm really curious to see too how they're going to move forward with less hosts, because they may have just killed Dolores and Maeve, two of like the main characters. Bernard's kind of taken a back seat this season. We thought he was going to be more of a driving force. The Man in Black's storyline is kind of meandered. It could move forward again, but kind of less interested in that part. Or if this is starting to be the humanities story that Caleb is taking forward, and kind of the humanity rising up against the AIs with the help of the host, the host being the initiating instance, the catalyst that kind of brings them into becoming free from the AIs. Or if they're just going to switch from one master, Rehoboam, to another, be it Caleb, be it the hosts, be it the AI that's driving the Dolores's actions beforehand. I don't think we'll see nearly all of that in this coming episode, but I think we'll kind of get a better conclusion of everything that we've seen, and kind of breadcrumbs on where we might be going next season. That will be completely blown out of the water as soon as the next season starts.
Right. Or actually maybe even by tomorrow, as early as tomorrow, with the reveals that they do come up with. So I don't worry too much about the hosts, because I feel like we have enough backups of data that they can recreate pearls and give us the people that we want back that way. I do feel like this iteration of Maeve and Dolores is probably toast, but again, easy to bring them back in the world that they've created.
True.
I'm kind of curious too now if the Man in Black, with his idea of being a savior now, is kind of sounding like Sirach in his ideas for Rehoboam, and that his goals are aligned with Sirach as far as killing all of the hosts. So this is something that's just been developed over the last couple of slides. So I'm wondering if he gets back into this as a main player instead of just a side part, and has Sirach. But then again, he seems more of the schizophrenic type, so Jean-Mi, again, may be an option there. And since Jean-Mi is the creator of Solomon, and that's who Caleb wants to deal with, then I think we may see a face-off between Caleb and the Man in Black in the final episode. Also, I'm going to guess that Bernard is going to kick it in the final season, or in the finale, as well as Ashley Stubbs. I think that we'll see the end of them this next episode.
Oh, I hope you're wrong, but I'm afraid you're right.
Again, you can always bring him back. Bernard might be a tougher one to bring back. I was really hoping to see Sir Anthony Hopkins again in this season, but I'm feeling like that's not going to happen, and that we're finally through with him. But we might get a reveal on why he had that split personality and how he's able to turn it off and on, that we haven't really touched since the first episode.
Yeah, I really hope we do, and I'm kind of afraid that we won't, just because they've kind of dropped it since that first episode. But maybe it's kind of one of those things that they lay the seed for, and then it pays off in this episode. I hope it does so much.
Yeah, like maybe they kill off Bernard, but the Arnold part still lives, and then we have Bernard talking in Sir Anthony Hopkins' voice or something.
That would be cool.
For season 4.
Yeah.
I think they'll probably leave him dead for season 3.
So, y'all, well, thank you very much for joining us here in Electric Grumpy World. I, of course, am Electric Sheep City. I can be found at twitch.tv/ElectricSheepCity. I stream every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Central. Guy Grumpy is Guy Grumpy. He can be found at twitch.tv/GuyGrumpy and on Twitter at GuyGrumpy. Grumpy, what is your stream schedule this day, my friend?
I stream on Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m., Thursdays at 9:30 p.m., and Sundays at 11 a.m. Pacific time, all times Pacific U.S. Always playing Hearthstone, as well as when we're here on Electric Sheep City's channel, Electric Grumpy World. We'll be back next Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to discuss the final episode.
Excitement abounds. I cannot wait. Our intro and outro music has been provided by Shadeswiper. You can follow her on Twitter at Shadeswiper. And our art has been provided by Riraro. You can find him on Twitter at Riraru, IAAO, with R's in between. Thank you very much for joining us today for Electric Grumpy World. As always, you stay electric and you stay grumpy.
You stay grumpy.
World.